Hi everyone. I just watched the BT live stream that was on Plugin Boutique, and he discussed an interesting kind of kick drum design method. I mean, it's pretty much a variation on the same theme in terms of layering. You know, you kind of got a kind of a mid layer, you have the sub layer, and then you have a kind of a top layer. But it was, there were a couple of things that he said in there that I thought were interesting, and I thought, I mean, I'm not going to suggest that what I'm about to do is going to be like the perfect thing, or is anything like what he actually does, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of have a look at. So his suggestions were, you know, kind of like a knock layer, which was between, you would EQ it between a 100, 110, 120 hertz to and then to 700 hertz. So you'd try and sort of EQ the other information out, and then to have a sub layer. And one of his suggestions was actually a square wave. So for that, we're going to try and use operator, and then his other suggestion for the top layer was basically to maybe look at some field recordings, and then within that was also the discussion of maybe instead of editing at the zero crossing point on the audio file, to actually sort of edit waveforms off axis. We might be able to try and do that, I don't know, but let's see where we go. So basically going to use an instrument rack. So it's basically going to be two simplers. So this will be the knock layer, and then the other one will be top, for want of a better description. Let's keep them all capitals, right? And then using operator as the sub layer. So the ideas they had for the sub layer were to actually use a square wave. So I'm going to need to pitch this down to sort of get into a kind of a sub sort of range. So let's try -36. That's a little bit kind of not everyone's favourite. Let's just tighten up the envelope. Let me just bring the volume up here, just in case. Hopefully it's not distorting out there. Let me just check. That's not too bad. So we've got a square wave, so we can have that. We can lengthen it or keep it quite short, so it gives us control over the sub layer there. He also suggested the pitch envelope on this layer. Let's bring that up. And it may or may not be. So we bring the decay down. Maybe bring the envelope up. There we go. It might be that. Sorry, it's a lot of tapping. I don't use a keyboard, I use the QWERTY keyboard. So that's me tapping away furiously at the keys. Turning it off. Something we're going to need to kind of work on, to kind of develop. So that's the idea there. I mean, one of the things we can also look at when we look at the waveform, I'm going to change that to 16 so we can see it more clearly. So you've got three harmonics. You've got the fundamental and then two harmonics. So varying the levels of these are going to change what we hear. So this is something that we can sort of bring into there. Maybe try. You can hear what that sounds like. It's a really good kind of sub kind of kick. Let's try that. So we can have that. So in terms of the tops, I mean, he was suggesting, excuse me, kind of like field based recordings. Now, I mean, you know, we all have really large libraries nowadays, I think. So, you know, we've got kind of probably spoilt for choice. Quite a long time ago, and I really cannot remember where I got these files from. This was basically a sound design sort of challenge. There's some really interesting ones. So this is basically all from a roll of adhesive tape and so on. So we can, you know, we might have something like that. Maybe we'll have that as the top. Let's bring down the sustain. So it might be something like that. Let me take that down. An octave. So I'm going to put this one back. So this one's going to go up an octave. So it's back at its original pitch, because I'm playing at C2 rather than C3 for the sub. It kind of works. Looking for kind of knock sounds. That's going to be, I mean, in many ways, what we can do is sort of take something that feels like it's got a bit of a thonk. It's a bit more nasally. It's kind of there. And we might not be looking for something like that. I mean, something like that would be probably good, but would need to come down in pitch. Because you don't want to hear it, because at the moment it kind of sounds like a tom or something like that. So we might want to bring it down 2 octaves. Too far. And before we get too judgmental, let's put the EQ in. So the EQ is going to be about, let's start at 100. Not up there. Here, let's start at 100. And then here we'll do 700 and turn it on. That's with the top. Kind of ish. Let's try different. It's probably a bit too much sustain on that. One of the other things he mentioned was the idea that the knock layer should be no more than like 100 mils. Kind of cleaned it up a bit, so we can experiment with the idea of having it. I think I'm going to boost the volume here a little bit. You can make it quite sort of short. It kind of needs to poke through. I'm not sure that's the best sound that we're going to have, but those two sort of work reasonably well together. Let's try them in the ubiquitous kick pattern. 4 on the floor. So we can get a bit more sub layer, a bit more pitch envelope. Without the pitch envelope, so that could be promising, making this 100, turning it off. It makes quite a substantial difference. So when we look at band 1, if we make that into 48. We'll try band 8 and we'll make that one 48 as well, so it's got a much sharper sort of cut off. I have a feeling you can move this around like that. 700 isn't absolute. So let's try this one. That's 100. So let's try 120. Actually, let me put that one back to 700. So that's the knock and the sub layer. Reducing the top. It's not too bad, you know. Might be a bit too pronounced. It's got a little bit too much of a peak here. Let's open it up a bit more. So yeah, you can hear that. So maybe, excuse me, I'm going to cough. Sorry about that. I need to drink more. It might be just the sharpness of the EQ. So maybe we don't want to have too sharp an EQ. Bring the sub back in. So there's quite a number of parts that need to be managed here, because we can tighten up the envelope of the sub, make it quite long, short. We can also manage the relative amplitude of the different harmonics or partials here. So we might be able to bring a little bit more out. So the time parameter on operator is going to give us a kind of a more sort of global control that will alter all kinds of parameters. It's sort of proportionate to where this is set. So by going negative, we can reduce it, and going positive, increasing it, we can make it more pronounced. That's cool. That works. Probably not there. So we can do all of that. So we've got the oscillator, we have the envelope. Let's try the envelope again. These different so when we bring in the fundamental, which is this first bar here, we can hear it crossed over. It changes how we hear the others, right? That's quite good, that one. Taking the top out, putting it back in. And again, these are really to be mixed to taste, because let's face it, we're listening to a kick drum all the time, or thereabouts. So we can try some processing as well. The obvious ones in terms of Ableton. I mean, I would sort of think, you know, glue compressor is going to do something for us. We won't go straight for the drum bus. Let's keep it at 2 and maybe 10, slightly faster release. Maybe about 4 dB or thereabouts. Maybe a little bit more. Now we can also put, obviously, sort of transient type. Let's try the for the top. So we can try that there. We can just increase the decay. Take out the knock. Take out the sub. So if we wanted this to be, say, a softer kick, I think we would want to just increase the fundamental more, so we can hear there, and probably reduce the knock layer to get a little bit more for the lower fundamental. You can see from the compression that it's sort of going past sort of 4 dB. And that knock layer, the top layer sort of comes through. Now one of the things he also said was the idea of influenced by different samplers, not editing at the zero crossing point, which let's say is the line running through the middle here, and to sort of go off axis. I'm going to take the snap off here. I mean, it's going to be pretty hard for anyone to judge that one. But it might be worth exploring. There we go. So let's try the drum bus. I mean, really at this point I'd probably use a transient shaper more than I'd probably use a drum bus. Partly because the drum bus introduces all these other elements. But let's try a bit more transient shaping-ish. Maybe that's... We don't have to worry about the damping because we've got EQ really. We can bring the damping down without really affecting the sound, so because that's already being taken care of. Seems to need to be sort of quite sort of aggressive in terms of the transient shaping, which may or may not be to our taste. Yeah, you can hear it in terms of how it's working. Let's get rid of the crunch. So that's still 100 mils, so let's get that down a bit more and increase the transient shaping, bring the threshold back up a bit more, so we're about 4 dB or thereabouts. Just feels a little bit distorted. Let's try one of the other drum bus. Let's try the transient master here. Okay. Bring some of the sustained out. I'm not sure what it's really going to do a lot. It's definitely making a difference. So then added to that, you know, I mean, we could try the drum bus on the other side. Let's try that over here after the glue compressor. Oh, sorry, I left that one in there. Now, of course, here now, dampening is actually going to contribute something. Let's put it at 9,000. A bit more crunch, a bit more drive, less transient shaping, more, so we can obviously bring everything out for the whole thing. Let's try the boom. Yeah, that's not too bad. So that's it with all the processing off. So we've got a little bit of processing on the, just to recap, we've got a little bit of processing on the knock, which is essentially EQ. And I've kind of taken off the corners of the EQ a little bit because it felt a bit too nasally. But the idea is that band 1 should be somewhere between 100, maybe 100, anywhere between 100, 110, 120. The high band should be 700. It's not changing. 700. We should manage the decay, which essentially we just need the initial kind of thock. So that should be anywhere up to 100 milliseconds in terms of the sampler, the decay. So we take the sustain off, we can take the release off. So we can try that. And then added to that, we added a transient shaper here. It's probably a bit much now. There's not enough information for it to grab hold of, but there's enough sort of initial transient there. And then we have two other layers. So we have the top layer, which is basically a field recording. So in BT's advice, it was, you could try field recordings for your top layer, and we're not using the rest of the sound. And again, managing the decay, and then just mixing that in with the knock layer, depending on how much you want to hear this top layer coming through. I mean, when we listen to something on its own, it's like, how long is a piece of string really? And then finally we've got the sub layer, which we're using operator. We started off with a square wave, which was square 3, and then altered the level of the various harmonics, the fundamental and the harmonics, and also shaped the envelope. So let's listen to that. So it's giving us this sub layer. And we've also got a pitch envelope here, giving a bit more of a hard attack. So you can manage that if you want a more softer beta, or the impression of a softer beta. Now we can also edit these parameters using the time control here, which will increase everything in proportion or proportionately. So we can tighten it up a little bit more if you need it to be tighter, or rather than editing each individual parameter. Maybe somewhere around about there. So we might ask ourselves, is that a bit like, this is the top layer, it's quite high. There's the thonky layer. And then after all of this, just as general kind of processing, we've got the glue compressor there. It's roughly about 4 dB of compression, and then makeup. And then finally, the drum bus is probably a bit too aggressive now. Take the crunch off, take the drive off. You can hear the transient shaping will really bring that out. Maybe we don't want to use it, but we might want to use the boom just to get a bit more. In the low end, a bit more transient shaping. So yeah, so that's basically his idea. I'm not saying that that is really what BT was, this is necessarily how he puts it together, but that's his idea that he discussed very briefly about this sort of layered approach, which he said this is what he always does. So I would recommend, I'll put it in the description, but I'd recommend having a look or watching the Plugin Boutique live stream, which is now over, but you can watch the recording. I'll make sure it's time-stamped to the question when they're discussing kick drums and this kind of layering technique. He also talked about off-axis editing of audio files rather than going for the zero crossing, so that's an interesting one to kind of play around with as well. Right, it's quite a short one. I hope that's useful, helpful to some of you, and see you next time.